I remember the first night my cousin stayed over during winter break, like it was branded into my memory. Snow was falling thick against the windows, and the quiet of our suburban street made the house feel oddly, profoundly isolated. He chose the guest room at the far end of the hall, and I watched him unpack with a nervous energy that immediately felt off. It was a typical winter night, the heater humming low, but a strange tension hung in the air the moment he stepped inside. He kept glancing around the room as if expecting someone else to be there. I laughed, trying to ease the mood, and told him the room was empty, just him and the spare bed. He didn't respond, just set his bag down and stared at the floor near the edge of the bed. After a few heavy minutes, he finally asked in a hushed voice, "Who sleeps on the floor beside my bed?" I paused, confused, thinking it was a joke, and smiled as I brushed it off as a childish concern. But he just frowned, his eyes locked on the corner, waiting for an answer I couldn't give. That's when I started to feel a cold unease, deep and creeping, that had nothing to do with the winter air. The heater was on, yet the room felt inexplicably, physically colder near that corner he couldn't look away from. I joked again, suggesting it was just shadows from the lamp, but he didn't laugh. Then, with terrifying calm, he told me, "The figure never moves, even when I turn the light on." My smile died as I glanced at the corner, and for the first time, I saw it too, a shape too still, too defined to be anything natural. My heart began to race. I tried to steady my voice and asked him to describe it. He whispered, "It's tall. Its head is just under the ceiling. It leans against the wall without shifting an inch." I wanted to dismiss it, light, shadows, imagination, but the air around that spot felt dead, the warmth from the heater simply not reaching it. I told him to come sit on the bed with me, ignoring the knot in my own stomach. He hesitated, then did, his gaze fixed on the corner like a laser. I saw the lamp flicker as he moved, and the shadow seemed to stretch in response, yet remain perfectly motionless. We sat in a silence so tense we could hear the hum of the heater and the distant crunch of snow outside, neither of us daring to speak. Every instinct screamed this was real. The figure didn't move, and the longer I stared, the more impossible it became to look away. The night stretched on, every sound amplified, the wind, the creak of the house settling. I realized we hadn't moved or spoken for 20 minutes. The figure hadn't budged, and neither had the crushing dread. I tried to logic it away, to call it a trick of shadows, but every glance made my stomach tighten. My cousin stayed frozen, eyes wide, refusing to look away. I told him to close his eyes, to wait it out, but the room felt impossibly, unbearably still. The heater's rattle and the muffled rhythm of snow against the glass only magnified the silence. I whispered, begging him to describe any feature, anything to make sense of this. He just shook his head, voice trembling, saying it was just a shape leaning there, its presence swallowing the room. That's when I truly understood. This wasn't normal cold. The air was heavy, oppressive, as if that figure had sucked all the warmth and life from its side of the room. A shiver crawled down my spine, and I wished with everything I had that I'd never brought him in there. I told him to lie down, to get under the covers, hoping proximity would help, but he refused, eyes still locked on the corner. I tried to reassure him, saying we'd check in the morning. Maybe it was just an old coat or a trick of the light. He didn't believe me. He didn't even blink, and as the minutes dragged on like hours, I started to notice subtle changes.
But then, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. The lamp flickered more often now, and the shadow in the corner seemed darker, its edges more defined and solid. I tried desperately not to react, not to feed his fear, but my own unease was mounting into a silent panic. That shape remained perfectly, unnaturally still, yet I could no longer convince myself it was inanimate. Outside, the snow intensified, tapping against the windows like insistent bony fingers, and I saw my cousin's hands gripping the edge of the bed, his knuckles white with strain. I wanted to get up, to march over and check that corner once and for all, but a primal instinct stopped me cold. There was something about the way the figure held itself that felt deliberate, patient, and utterly terrifyingly waiting. I whispered for him to close his eyes again, and this time he reluctantly obeyed, his whole body shaking slightly. I counted silently in the heavy silence, trying to make rational sense of the irrational fear that had wrapped around both of us. When I dared to glance back, the figure was, of course, still there. Yet somehow the profound sense of being watched was stronger than before, a tangible pressure pressing down, making the room feel claustrophobically small. The air now carried a faint scent of damp wood and something else I couldn't name, and I realized with a chill that even as morning approached, that corner radiated an unnatural, deep cold. My cousin let out a quiet, involuntary shiver, and I wished more than anything in the world that this was all just a strange, shared illusion. The hours dragged, every creak of the old house and whisper of wind magnified into a potential threat. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, but his presence made the air so heavy it was hard to breathe, setting every instinct in my body screaming in unison. I sat rigid beside him, clinging to the fragile hope that morning light would banish the shadow, though a deep part of me knew it wouldn't feel any less real. And then morning light did finally creep slowly through the blinds, yet the corner still held its shape, unmoving and silent. My cousin's eyes stayed wide, fixed on it, and I realized with a sinking heart that neither of us had dared to sleep. The warmth of the sun seemed unable to penetrate that part of the room, as if the figure absorbed all light and heat. I tried to sound casual, suggesting we just get breakfast and that everything would look normal in the daylight. My cousin didn't respond at first, only inching closer to me on the bed, as if distance alone could protect him. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but my own fear kept me rooted to the spot, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. The snow outside reflected brilliant sunlight into the room, but the shadow remained rigid, almost solid in the corner. I told myself it was just the angle, the darkness of the far wall exaggerating a coat or a chair, yet my mind refused to let go of the terror. My cousin shivered again and whispered, barely audible, "It was watching me all night." We both stayed frozen for minutes, terrified that breaking the silence would provoke the figure. I debated reaching over to touch him, to offer some comfort and convince us both it was harmless, but even my own hand felt leaden with hesitation. The shape didn't react, yet the crushing tension suggested it was aware of us, completely and utterly. Finally, I told him to look away and pretend it wasn't there, while I, with trembling hands, opened the closet door to check for anything unusual. I pulled the door wide, my breath held, but it was empty.
But the reprieve was fleeting. The old hangers swayed slightly in the empty closet, and I felt my pulse ease just a fraction, though the dark corner remained as oppressive as ever. I closed the closet door slowly, my eyes never leaving the figure, which hadn't moved a single solitary fraction of an inch. My cousin asked, hope thin in his voice, if it had finally disappeared. I lied straight to his face, forcing a smile and saying it must have just been a trick of the light all along. His relief was heartbreakingly brief, and I knew in my gut he wasn't fooled for a second. The corner remained a pool of defiant shadow, a quiet, screaming reminder that the figure hadn't left us. It was just waiting. We tried to move on, to carry our breakfast from the kitchen back into the living room like everything was normal. Yet both of us kept glancing over our shoulders, our nerves shot. Every small sound, the floor creaking, the wind brushing against the house, felt amplified, charged, as if the figure was tracking each and every one of our movements.
Stayed painfully close, whispering that he didn't dare look back. As the day wore on, we went through the motions, but the unease never left. That shadowed corner stretched into every thought, poisoning normalcy. I realized then that no matter how mundane a house seems, a single quiet presence can shatter your entire perception, leaving a lingering chill that no amount of sunlight can ever truly erase. And by nightfall, I could no longer convince myself it was harmless. That corner had become a permanent memory we now carried with us, subtle, persistent, and heavy. Even now, recalling that winter guest room, I feel the same impossible weight pressing against the air,
and my cousin's words echoed with terrifying clarity. The figure never moved. If you've ever felt a presence in a silent room, you know that chill never fully leaves. And that story is just the beginning. Because remember the first night my father stayed over that same winter. The snow was piling deep against the windows, and the streets outside our silent suburban neighborhood were utterly still. We had set him up in that same guest room at the end of the hall, and I remember thinking how ordinary it all felt. A quiet evening you'd expect in a small town. Yet there was something in the air I couldn't place, a wrong note in the harmony. He seemed unsettled the moment he stepped into the room, his eyes darting over every corner as if expecting someone else to already be there. I laughed lightly, telling him the room was empty except for the spare bed, and he gave me a hesitant smile that never reached his eyes. A strange, subtle tension made the heater's hum seem louder, more ominous. Just a few minutes later, he asked me quietly, almost casually, why the guest room door locked from the inside, even though no one was in there. I shrugged, explaining it was just the old latch acting up, but he frowned deeply. His gaze drifted toward the dark hallway, and the quiet dread in his voice made my own stomach tighten with a fresh wave of unease. I tried to brush it off, joking that the door had probably just stuck in the cold, but he shook his head slowly, insisting with a whisper, "It wasn't the latch." He said someone or something had been leaning against the door from the inside, watching the hallway. I froze, trying to convince myself he was overreacting, even as a visceral chill shot down my spine. The room felt physically colder near that door, a pocket of ice the heater couldn't touch. I told him it must be a draft, but he shook his head again, describing a figure, tall and impossibly still, that didn't move, not an inch, no matter how long he watched. My rational mind scrambled for a logical explanation, yet the crushing weight of his words made it hard to breathe normally. I watched him pace the room, hesitant, haunted, as if the figure might materialize at any second. The snow outside created a tomb-like silence, no cars, no footsteps, and every creak of the old house boomed in the stillness. I kept glancing at the door, wrestling with the impossible. Had he truly seen something, or was his mind playing a horrific trick? He moved to the bed, sitting rigidly on the edge, his hands gripping the blanket, his eyes laser-locked on the door. I tried to reassure him, saying no one could be inside without our knowledge. Yet even I had to admit there was a strange, heavy pressure in the air near the door. It wasn't just cold. It was a presence, separate and consuming. We sat there for agonizing minutes in total silence, both acutely aware of the sinister energy now polluting the room. Every tiny sound, the heater's hum, a loose shutter tapping outside, was magnified, each one feeding the coiled tension. I realized that even if it was nothing, the feeling alone was powerful enough to shatter anyone's peace. Finally, my father leaned back slightly, never breaking his stare, and muttered, "It hasn't moved at all." I swallowed hard, any attempt at laughter dead in my throat, and I understood in that moment that this was another memory cementing itself into my life, unshakable, destined to linger long into the daylight. I tried desperately to convince myself it was a trick of the cold air, a collage of shadows. Yet that corner near the door felt denser, heavier than anything I'd ever experienced. My father remained a statue, eyes glued to that spot, waiting for the figure to reappear. My own heartbeat was a dead drum in the quiet, syncopated with every tick of the old wall clock. He whispered again that the figure hadn't moved once since he first noticed it, and a tight, cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach.
I asked him, voice low, to describe it in any detail that could explain this away, but he only said, "It's tall, completely still, and it's aware of us, both of us." My rational mind was slipping, overtaken by the sheer mounting weight of dread. The heater rattled a weak protest, and I noticed the snow pressing against the window looked suffocatingly thick, muffling the entire world outside. Every small creak in the floor, every groan of old wood made me flinch, each one amplified by the room's eerie, watchful stillness. My father shivered slightly, his hands clenched on the blanket, and I felt utterly powerless to dispel the deep, crawling unease that had claimed us both. I suggested we step into the hallway together, a desperate bid to break the tension with movement and logic, hoping the empty corridor would prove our fears wrong. He shook his head, refusing to leave the room, and uttered words that made my stomach churn. "The figure seemed to be watching," he said, even when the door was open. I didn't press him because a deep, instinctual part of me realized he might be terrifyingly right. So instead, I tried to force normalcy, focusing on the most mundane details I could find: the crooked picture frame on the wall, the tiny crack in the ceiling paint, anything to reclaim the room. Yet every single time my eyes flicked toward that door, my pulse would spike. The corner seemed darker, more defined, almost solid, as if it were pulling substance from the very air around it. The space itself felt denser there, a vacuum that absorbed light and warmth alike. Minutes stretched into a silent eternity where neither of us moved or spoke. The world outside had vanished beneath the snow, leaving only the two of us and that unshakable, patient presence. I felt my chest tighten with a suffocating awareness. We were not alone, even though every logical bone in my body screamed that no one could possibly be there. I finally sat beside him on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb his focus, and tried to spark a conversation about anything at all, to drag our attention away from the door. His gaze never wavered, and I realized with a sinking feeling that even our speech was now under the silent, oppressive influence of that thing in the corner. I wanted to laugh, to shake it all off as shared imagination, but the stillness in the room was a physical weight, undeniable and thick. The heater's hum, once a comforting background note, now felt intrusive, each vibration refracting through the floorboards like subtle, creeping footsteps. The snow outside refracted the dim light, casting shifting patterns on the walls that almost suggested movement in the periphery. I didn't dare look directly, terrified of confirming what my father had seen all night long. By the time the clock ticked closer to morning, the tension had not eased a single bit. Every primal instinct I had was screaming that something was there, something unmoving, yet fully and utterly present. My father's quiet breath and the faint, clean scent of winter air were the only threads tethering us to reality, yet that corner held its own impossible gravity, a dense pocket of dread we could not ignore. Mid-morning sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds, but the corner near the door remained unnervingly, defiantly dark. My father stayed rooted on the edge of the bed, still fixated, as if even a blink would make the figure either vanish or, worse, advance. I kept my own eyes trained on that part of the room, feeling a tension so profound no warmth could penetrate it. I suggested again, voice barely steady, that we open the door and check the hallway together to reclaim some shred of control. He shook his head, insisting now that the figure would follow even there, its presence feeling more oppressive than ever. I hesitated, and that hesitation confirmed everything. He might be right, and that thought churned my stomach more than anything else that morning. The snow outside glimmered with a muted, cold light, yet our room felt completely closed off, isolated, as though the figure had successfully carved out its own permanent space within our world. I tried to distract myself with microscopic details, the folds in the blanket, the faint odor of chilled air, anything to anchor my spinning mind. Yet every single glance toward the door corner was a brutal reminder. Something unseen was watching, and it was waiting with infinite patience.
We moved slowly, almost ceremonially, toward the closet,
making a final attempt to scrutinize the room for anything out of place. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled the door open, but it was just empty old hangers and bare shelves. Closing it quietly, the click of the latch sounded far too loud, and I realized the oppressive weight had not lifted at all. My father remained silent, his eyes still glued to the door, whispering once more, as if to himself, that the figure never, ever moved. I sat beside him again, trying to coax out a conversation about anything else, a lifeline to normalcy. His gaze never broke from the corner, a silent, profound acknowledgement that the presence lingered in a way that defied all explanation. Minutes bled into hours, punctuated only by the relentless hum of the heater and the occasional mournful creak of the house settling. The air felt heavy, denser near the door, as if the room itself was conspiring to make the figure undeniable. I wanted to convince myself it was all a trick of the mind, but every instinct I possessed screamed otherwise, a quiet, sophisticated terror that lingered without a single sight or sound. As afternoon approached, we tried to occupy ourselves with mundane tasks, organizing clothes, checking the window seals. But our movements were slow, cautious, and stiff. Every glance toward the corner provoked the same visceral reaction, a sudden chill, a pressure in the temples, the undeniable skin-crawling sense of being observed. I realized then it wasn't just the shape. It was the stillness that dismantled the mind. The hours blurred, the snow still falling silently outside. And though the figure never moved, its presence absolutely shaped the entire day. Our conversation dwindled to bare, necessary whispers. Laughter was impossible, completely replaced by a tense, exhausting vigilance neither of us had ever experienced before. The room no longer felt like just a room. It felt alive with a silent, oppressive awareness. Every shadow was exaggerated, every sliver of light scrutinized for hidden intention. And by evening, we both understood on a bone-deep level that this presence would linger far beyond our sight. That door corner had become an indelible memory, branded into the space, a permanent reminder that even the most familiar, mundane spaces could harbor something utterly inexplicable. I left the room reluctantly that night, casting one final wary glance over my shoulder, knowing with cold certainty the figure was still there, and that the unease it seeded would remain long after we tried to return to normal life. And that idea that a familiar place can turn unfamiliar in an instant is something that has haunted me for years. I've always remembered one particular weekend like it was yesterday. My best friend, Jason, had invited me to stay at his parents' house while they were out of town, and I was thrilled to escape the city for a few days. The streets were perfectly quiet, blanketed in fresh snow, and the suburban neighborhood had that uncanny, profound stillness that only comes when everyone is tucked inside on a freezing winter night. I didn't think much of the guest room at first. It was just a warm, simple place to sleep with a window overlooking the snow-covered driveway. The first night felt ordinary enough, but there was an odd, metallic quality to the silence in the house that I just couldn't shake. The wind made the trees scrape like fingernails against the windows, and I could actually see my own breath in the cold draft sneaking under the door. Jason had left a note on the dresser about snacks and which lights to keep on. I remember laughing at myself, thinking I was just being paranoid about the quiet, but somewhere deep in the back of my mind, a small, cold seed of unease had begun to settle and take root. Then, around midnight, as I was finally drifting off, I heard it, a soft, persistent rattling. My eyes snapped open, and I froze, straining to listen over the faint hum of the heating vent. The door handle was moving, gently, almost imperceptibly, twisting back and forth as if someone was testing it from the outside. My heart instantly started hammering against my ribs. I called out, "Jason?" But the hallway was empty, silent. There was no sound of snow crunching outside, no sign anyone had entered. The rattling just stopped, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt suffocating. I tried desperately to convince myself it was just the wind, that the door had loosened in the frame, but every primal instinct in my body screamed otherwise. I sat bolt upright in bed, pulling the blankets tight, staring at the dark hallway. Part of me felt embarrassed, imagining Jason sneaking in for a prank, but I knew he was miles away at his friend's house. My phone was right there on the nightstand, but I hesitated to call. Part of me didn't want to acknowledge out loud that something was very, very wrong. The next morning, I told myself it had all been a bad dream. I checked the door handle. It wasn't loose. Everything appeared perfectly normal. The snow outside, undisturbed except for my own footprints. Still, the memory clung to me. The rattling, and worse, the lingering echo of hearing my name whispered in the hallway. I tried to laugh it off when I saw Jason that afternoon, but he looked at me strangely when I mentioned it. He said, "I was at my friend's house all night last, casual, confused, and that didn't comfort me at all. It terrified me." That evening after dinner, I decided to turn in early to the guest room. The winter darkness settled over the street like a lead weight, and the distant lights from other houses flickered weakly. I kept seeing shadows move across the walls, shapes that dissolved when I looked directly at them. I tried to focus on a book, but the uneasy feeling was a live wire in my chest. The quiet of the house felt unnatural, predatory, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting.
I had just turned off the bedside lamp and plunged the room into darkness when it happened again. The door handle rattled softly, a distinct metallic jiggle that made the bed frame creak under my weight. My blood ran ice cold. And then a voice, unmistakably Jason's voice, called my name from the hallway. "Hey, are you awake?" It was casual, friendly, like nothing was wrong, but I knew with absolute chilling certainty that the house was empty. That familiar tone twisted into something terrifyingly alien in the dead stillness. I gripped the blankets, trying to slow my roaring pulse, staring at the door as if I could seal it shut by sheer will. Every shadow in the hallway seemed alive now, stretching and twisting with a life of its own. The voice called again, just a whisper this time, softer, more insistent, coaxing me to come closer, to open the door. My rational mind scrabbled for an explanation. A trick of sound, an echo, the wind, but the way it sounded, so close, so deliberate, so intimately wrong, made it impossible to ignore. Finally, I mustered every ounce of courage I had left. Sliding out of bed and inching toward the door, my feet pressed into the icy cold carpet in absolute silence, but each step felt monumental, like wading through cement. When I finally flung the door open, my heart in my throat, the hallway was empty, perfectly, unnervingly still, with no footprints in the fresh snow just beyond the window. The silence rushed back in, heavier and more menacing than before. I backed into the guest room, locked the door, and sat on the bed shivering, my mind reeling with one horrific realization. This quiet house was not empty, it was occupied. I spent the rest of that endless night sitting bolt upright. My eyes welded to the hallway door. Every creak of the house, every groan from the settling walls made me flinch. I kept hearing faint, indecipherable whispers, and at times it felt as if someone was pacing just beyond the door, listening to my shallow breaths, waiting for me to make a single wrong move. Morning light filtered weakly through the snow-laden trees, painting the quiet suburban street in a deceptively calm, ordinary glow. But I couldn't shake the memory of that voice. I tried to talk myself down, to cling to the idea of a dream or a trick of the mind. Yet when I touched the door handle, it was cold, slightly damp, as if someone had been holding it from the other side just moments before. I told myself I had to get a grip before Jason returned. Breakfast was a blur. I barely touched the food, my eyes constantly flicking toward the hallway. Every shadow felt wrong, elongated, twitching unnaturally. I couldn't escape the memory of the rattling handle, the whispering voice calling me, as if inviting me into a game I never agreed to play. That final night, I tried to sleep with the lamp on, a feeble circle of light my only shield. The wind rattled the windows, blowing snow against the siding. I closed my eyes, hoping exhaustion would win. But then came the faintest scratching along the hallway floor, subtle, deliberate, like fingertips being dragged lightly across the wood. My stomach churned. I pulled the blankets over my head, trying to block it out, but then I heard it again, Jason's voice, calling my name. low and hesitant. It didn't sound angry or playful. It sounded patient, like it had been waiting all this time for me to finally respond. The hairs on my neck stood straight up. I couldn't hide any longer. I peeked out from under the covers and froze. The hallway was empty, or so I thought. There was a faint shimmer near the far wall, almost like a figure was there, but blurred, not fully solid. My heart hammered wildly. I wanted to call out, but my voice died in my throat. My rational mind screamed that this was impossible, that Jason was miles away. Gripping the edge of the mattress, I inched toward the door. Each step careful and deliberate. The carpet muffled my movement, but a cold draft from the hallway made me shiver violently. The shimmering figure seemed to shift slightly as I approached, always just at the edge of my vision. When I finally reached the hallway, it was gone, leaving only the faint, impossible outline of footprints in the snow outside the window. I flung the front door open, thinking maybe it was some cruel prank from outside. The snow was utterly untouched. The street was empty. No cars, no people, just the soft, whispering wind through the bare trees. I realized then that whatever had been in the house was unseen, and yet it had been inside with me the entire time. I retreated to the guest room, locked the door, but sleep was impossible. The room felt smaller, heavier, as if the walls were pressing in. I couldn't stop thinking about the rattling handle, the voice, the shimmer. By dawn, I was exhausted, jittery, and utterly convinced that staying another night would be a catastrophic mistake. That evening, I made my decision. I packed a small bag quietly, desperate to leave before Jason returned. The snow outside was thick and heavy, coating the driveway in a deep white. I could hear the faint hum of the heating system, but even that comforting noise now seemed wrong, hollow, as if it were merely masking something else. The hallway stretched before me, longer than I remembered, shadows pooling in corners where the light simply refused to reach. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to move quickly, but my feet felt glued to the carpet, weighed down by a terror that had seeped into the very foundations of the house. And then, cutting through the suffocating silence, I heard it again. The soft, metallic rattling of the guest room door handle. My name echoed down the hallway. It was Jason's voice, calm and familiar, but impossibly, wrongly close. I froze, gripping the strap of my bag until my knuckles turned white, trying to steady my frantic breathing. The voice repeated my name, slow and deliberate, each syllable pulling me toward the pooling shadows. The rational part of me screamed to run, to burst out into the snow and never look back, but a horrified, magnetic part of me couldn't resist the need to see what was there. I inched closer to the front door, but each step felt slower, heavier, as if the air itself had turned to syrup. The rattling continued, now joined by soft scrapes across the carpet. It sounded like something was pacing the hallway, waiting for me to step into a trap I couldn't see.
My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt utterly trapped, despite the wide-open, frozen world just beyond the front door. When my hand finally found the cold brass of the front door handle, I glanced back one last time toward the guest room. The door handle was twitching violently now, and Jason's voice called out one last time, louder, urgent, almost pleading. The hallway looked empty, but the shadows near the far wall were shifting, breathing with a life of their own, and for the first time I saw them. Faint, damp outlines of footprints leading from the guest room into the living room. A trail that hadn't been there moments before and that no one could have made. I yanked the door open and plunged into the snow, the biting cold searing through my thin slippers. The street was a tomb, silent, empty, the windows of neighboring houses dark and blind. I needed to run to my car, to put miles between me and that house. But then I heard it, the crunch of footsteps in the snow behind me, matching my friend's exact rhythm and gait. They followed me, stopping whenever I stopped. I whirled around expecting to see a figure, but the yard was pristine, empty. my breath fogged in ragged clouds in the icy air, and in that moment, the horrific truth crystallized, the voice calling me. The door rattling. It had never been Jason. The figure I'd glimpsed, that blurred shimmer at the edge of the hallway, had been inside the house all along. It had followed me. It was with me now. Pure panic welled up. A tidal wave of adrenaline. I ran, slipping and stumbling in the snow, desperate to leave that street, that neighborhood, that memory far behind me. Even now, years later, I can't explain what happened in that house. The door handle rattled softly. My friend's voice called from an empty hallway, and I was dead certain the house was never, ever as empty as it seemed. We think of suburban streets in winter as safe, quiet, and ordinary, but sometimes the ordinary is just a veil. If these stories of quiet, watchful spaces unsettled you, you're not alone. Like, share, and subscribe for more tales that explore what lingers in the corners of the everyday.